I will jump over to our next conversation on data, using economic data to highlight local needs. I've asked Zeke to interrupt me if I sound terrible like I have, but in the case that I'm not, I'd just like to introduce the section quickly because I know running a little bit back on time, but so states have found it really important to use a lot of economic data. We've heard an oft-touted number about from the BEA that 2.1% of GDP was represented by the outdoor recreation economy. That's nearly $460 billion. That ranges from 1.1% of the DC economy, unfortunately, I guess just don't get outside at all, to 5.8% in Hawaii. There's a range of activities. It's conventional activities such as boating and fishing is a big one, RVing or snow sports in states like Minnesota, Colorado. And then there's core activities, so like outdoor concerts and the like. But then there's a third activity, supporting activities, and that's travel and tourism is a big aspect of that. It's 51% of outdoor rec actually, and which is great because we'll be hearing a couple of folks thinking about tourism and its importance of getting reaching folks. And to that end, we'll be hearing from Simon Caballero, who runs tourism data sales at Uber Media, and also Zeke Coleman, who's the Director of Data Intelligence at Visit Savannah. They have been working together using Uber data to just figure out who's going to their parks and how they use that data to tell a more local story, which is great. And then third, we'll hear from Arrivalist, the team, Axel, and some of the work that they're doing related to using local data in their space as well. So first, I will kick it over to Simon, and Simon can share his screen, and then we'll keep going on the presentation. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you, Matt. Hello, everybody. Happy to be here. Happy Friday to everyone. So yeah, as Matt just referenced, we here at Uber Media, we deal with mobile location data. And give me a second here while I share today's agenda. I'll share a bit about who we are as a company and about the basics of mobile location data and essentially why we're here. And then I'll throw it on to Zeke, who is one of our partners. They utilize our location data in Visit Savannah for their travel and tourism studies. So Uber Media, we specialize and dedicate ourselves to mobile location data. We work in the tourism and travel industry directly with many destinations across the country and around the world. And not only do we provide data directly to these destinations, but we also work with a lot of research institutions and media agencies around the country. Some of these names you may be familiar with. They source their data from us and provide it to their partners in a more easily digestible way. Now, the data that we can provide is excellent at answering questions like where people are coming from, their origin markets, what do they do once they are visiting your area, and also we're able to let you know a little bit about who these visitors are so you can better understand their demographics and their travel patterns. The behind the scenes on how this all works, the technology behind it, mobile location data nowadays is very important to have. And you may be familiar with a screen like what we're looking at right now, where if you've ever downloaded an app onto your phone, you may have seen a pop-up say, would you like to share your location data with the publisher? And is at this point when anyone using an app like this allows to share their data, we start collecting it. And this location data is essentially pulling data directly from a GPS within your phone and then feeding it to our servers. we at Uber Media, we work with over 150,000 publishers around the world to collect this data. And this allows us to have a really great insight as to where people are originating from. But a lot of work goes into not just storing the data, but we have a very strict procedure of cleaning the data, making sure it's at high quality, that it meets all the requirements that our clients have to ensure that it's a reliable data set. And also, a lot of this work goes into also preventing any sort of privacy concerns on the devices that are feeding us this data. So we're actually a company that has a privacy shield granted by the Department of Commerce in the US. This means that we are actually compliant with European privacy laws, as well as American privacy laws as well. And all of this location data that we're able to provide can be had as raw data sets. And to be honest, the technology itself can be fairly convoluted. And because of the brief amount of time that we have available, I'm going to be skipping a lot of the more in detail things about what goes into powering this all. But at the end of the day, once you are able to look at the data, you may see something that's similar to what you're seeing on screen, which is a Excel sheet. You can see we have devices, device IDs, we have GPS coordinates of where people are coming from. And in our particular case, we're able to provide a little bit of context of what these coordinates mean. So we can provide you with country, state, DMAs, metro areas of where people are originating from. And all of this data is many times too much to digest in processing a software like Excel, for example. So a lot of the time we are utilizing this sort of data in platforms like Tableau. And what you're looking at here, for example, is one of our partners, Rove Media, taking our raw data sets and building a Tableau platform for U.S. Travel Association. And in this case, what they were studying is U.S. national park visitation throughout the COVID pandemic and how things have progressed through all of 2020. Now, very important to understand, just like any data sample, mobile location data is something that works best when also paired with another data set. We don't always recommend utilizing it by itself, but as you can see in this case, for example, you can have a really great idea as to where people are originating from, if they're locals, if they're tourists, if so, how much distance they're traveling from their origin market to a destination. And also we're able to see how much time they're spending in the area. So the data itself can provide a lot of insights as to how travel can impact any given area. And it depends on how much time you're able to spend in sifting through the data sets to really understand the visitation. And this is where I like to throw the ball onto Zeke Coleman, who is a great partner of ours in Visit Savannah. They have been doing a really great job at essentially filtering all of our raw data sets and putting it to work for their studies. And Zeke, I'll let you take it on from here.
Nice. Thanks, Simon. And thank you guys for having me. I'll try to share my screen now and just give you guys a look at the platform itself. So Visit Savannah is a destination marketing organization. So we are primarily using this data to understand who our customer is, where they're interacting within our destination, where they're coming from, how long they stay, and what are the places in our destination that basically get the most love, so to speak. And so I could see a lot of parallels between our organization and the types of organizations that I understand are on this call. But I just want to kind of walk you through some of the data. So this is data shown for 2020, so it's very current. We broke up our market into the greater Savannah area. So you can see the total sample size is a little over 500,000 devices, so 632,000 devices in 2020. The length of stay, you can view how long people stayed on average. And then for each of these, whether it's the visitor sampled or the length of stay, it's broken up by people who came from within our state and stayed overnight, within our state, and irrespective of whether they stayed overnight or not. National, which is everyone not in our state in the US who stayed overnight, and then national, everybody not in our state. So, and then also international, but that data is really helpful. And then we broke up our market into neighborhoods. And so I went in and polygoned, and Uber Media helped to basically segment our market up into the different neighborhoods that we have. So you can see as I click it, it kind of highlights it on the map, and you can see which one you're kind of looking at there. And again, you can look at the length of stay, you can look at how many people, how long they stayed. And further, we went by point of interest. So right now you can see the Alita. So what I'm gonna do really quickly is I'm gonna use this point of interest one, and I'll go to last year, September, because I wanna show you something kind of interesting. Actually, first for this one, I'll use last year, April. Sorry guys, this year, April. Gotta make sure. So you can see the Alita had 45 people this April, which probably every hotel had 0 to 45 people staying there. And here's some more of the data that you'll see, but I want you to see in market what that 45 number looks like, so that you can see what Simon was talking about. Okay, it's loading up. It's showing you, okay, that's the hotel right there. Okay. Now, in May, Georgia opened back up. And so you can see we got more. And then in June, even more. So these are all devices that showed up in market. Now, I want to show you something that we discovered that you guys might be interested in. So in September, if I change this point of interest to, or I'm actually going to show you a whole neighborhood, and it will be one of our sort of outdoor and recreation areas. So we have a part of our city called Back River, and this is basically Little Tybee Island. So I want to show you how dense this is. This is like forest area. So you can see in 2019 of September, not very many people, I mean, some people ventured out, but not many. And these are their mobile devices. And this area here is much more like the restaurants and stuff that you can see, and some outdoorsy stuff. But this is really the outdoors land. I want you to see what happens in 2020 of September and the difference. Pay attention to the map. So you see how much more pink it gets over in this. I mean, people really started to explore and go all around. And I'm going to change it from this to the gray map so you can see that difference once again. If I go back to September, that's what it looked like. And then I come to 2020, much more. I mean, people are everywhere. And that matches what we would assume. And that matches the data that we were all getting from different organizations, that people were going into open spaces. But something like this could really justify your parks and you know, the usage of them, and really vindicate you, because not only do you have the visualization, which is very easy to kind of understand, you can also see the actual numbers for that month. You can see the total sample size, and then how many were from where. Then if you want to go into it a bit further, you can look at the origin of those visitors and exactly the percentage of sample size, and you can look at the demographics of those visitors. I saw in the last presentation, just kind of touching on demographics, and you can kind of see what is the makeup of our population, what's the median household income, what is the audience affinity. So this is having to do with what they're doing online. So for instance, Bargain, where is Bargain Hunter? Right here. So Bargain Hunter is someone who spends a certain amount of time using couponing apps. But all of these very interesting data to kind of break up that market and present to your stakeholders. And then again, like I said, you can actually visualize it for them so they can see, like, this is real. People take these things, you don't even think about it. You have it next to your bed when you go to sleep. It's on the train with you. It's at work. It's, you know, if you go take a trip, it's in your hotel room. When you go out for a tour, you go to the outdoors, it goes with you. And all of that is communicated back to Uber Media and companies like this. And they've so nicely put it into this platform so that you can use it. I think that's almost all I wanted to show. I'm sure we're probably running out of time. We definitely have the length of stay, the capability to look at that. And are there any questions you guys want to go into the questions that we might have?
There are a few questions in the chat box. Matt, did you want to, if your audio is working, if not, I'll just do it.
Yeah, one question I actually had from the previous session. So Kayleen had mentioned that she used a lot of the data like this to make going out in parts too. And so clearly, like, there's this example. And so, like, what are the asks that you think someone might have in just looking at this, and how does that help your kind of processes there?
It's a little hard to hear, but
okay, yeah. So Matt, I'll just take it. So what the question was, what are the principal apps that people are using that Uber Media uses to aggregate for these views? So what are these different apps that you're getting all the information from?
Sure thing, I can take that one, Zeke. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we work with over 150,000 app publishers. Many of them have multiple apps, but just as an example of what we work with, just to name a few, we work with the Weather Channel app or the CBS Sports app. Also, you can have TV Guide, Twitter. There is just an almost infinite amount of apps. So we're getting an aggregate amount of data. It's really important to also understand, because of the technical limitations of the technology, some of these apps are only reporting a location maybe 2 or 3 times a day for 10 minutes at a time at most. Mm-hmm. So it's really having the vast majority of apps providing us data as often as possible, and aggregating all of that is what's giving us really great insight. But there are hundreds of thousands of apps out there.
Yeah, and then there's another question that came up which we had talked about in our.
You just muted, Devin.
Devin, yeah, we can't hear you.
Sorry, has anybody voiced privacy concerns about the use of this data? And what are the the steps that you all take to protect people's privacy?
Certainly, yeah. So as I mentioned in the slides, we actually have privacy certification from the U.S. Department of Commerce. We're very privacy focused, especially nowadays. Everybody has some sort of concern about how their location data is being tracked. We are very strict about anonymizing the data once we receive it. As part of that data cleansing process, we actually take a lot of time to make sure that device IDs, which is essentially the social security number for any given device, is anonymized. And also we make sure that we are also not providing an exact location. It's called jittering of a location, so that we may know internally at the company more or less where a device goes to, but when providing it to our partners, we provide a more general area of a few miles instead of an exact location. So we do take many steps to ensure that people's privacies are respected.
This is Ricky in Alaska. Can you talk about, you had mentioned that some of your data is collected from the GPS within the phone, but then do you use cell tower data? And then how does that work in areas that don't really have cellular tower data in more rural areas? And so can you talk about that kind of mix of where you get your data from in terms of the location?
Excellent question, thank you. So we specifically get the data directly from the cell phone's GPS unit, not from cell towers. There are other service providers that only work with cell towers. GPS data from the device itself is more accurate, and the only limitation there is that device's connection to the internet. And as you correctly pointed out, some rural areas may not have a signal or cell reception. So what's great about how the technology works, a lot of that information is cached onto the device until it reconnects to the internet, and then that information is uploaded later onto the server. So let's say someone does travel to go hike in a very remote area this weekend. We may not immediately see that data pop up, but we may see it within a week or so once that person comes back into reception.
Oh yeah, that's a good question, because I mean, a lot of these areas that our members might think about getting information on are probably areas without good cell reception, but they're still collecting the data of where you went, but it's just not uploading right away. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, as long as the cell phone is having a good reception of the GPS signal, it's really what matters, is being able to connect to the satellites. As long as that's fairly accurate, that is all recorded. It's cached onto the device, and then that information is later uploaded online.
This is Ricky. One more question. In terms of historical data, like if we signed up with Uber Media, State of Alaska, we want information. How far back does your information cache go back? I saw Visit Savannah had, 2019, 2020, 2021, imagine, but how far back does your historical data set go?
Yeah, it goes back as far as 5 years. So if you wanted to do a historical look at and trends of visitation for, let's say, 2016, 2017, 2018, we can easily do that. Pulling historical data is fairly easy to do. And also, as you mentioned, you can even go month to month going forwards for 2021 as well. But it's really interesting, especially with everything that's going on with the pandemic, to be able to go and look at what your essentially your visitation benchmark was for 2019, and then see how it changes for 2020, and then how you can use that information to set yourself up for recovery for this year.
Great. Not sure if people can hear me still, but yeah. I had one question. I found it interesting in our early conversations or prep call about just kind of how you understand some of the demographic information in the data sets you get. And just like, because you can't get specific IDs with some of the data, but how do you translate it into some demographic information that way? If that didn't make sense, sorry, I'm trying to maybe move on.
I'll let you answer that, Simon.
I'm sorry, I did have some static on my end. I did hear you were asking about demographics, correct?
Yeah, so it's about like how do you translate some of the information from that you gather into demographic information, and like who's going where, and I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great question. So in terms of how do we figure out demographics, it's a fairly interesting methodology. There's something called common evening, common daytime location. So it's essentially an average of where a device spends most of its time during the day and night. So what we do is we study, in our particular case, the past 3 months worth of history for a device, and see more or less where that device spends its evening hours. And that average, we make a pretty big assumption that that is where that device lives, where that person goes home to every night. Now, by having that GPS location, by having those coordinates, we more or less know the neighborhood that person lives in. And that we translate into, we take that information and we tie it down to the census block data that the US Census Bureau has assigned to that neighborhood. So the demographic information that you're seeing is directly from a household in the US Census Bureau's data. So it's very, very accurate, but it is not at a device level. It's not like we know an exact person's demographics. We know that household demographics. So whatever is being reported by the US Census Bureau, it's essentially what we are providing to you. Hope that was clear.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for that answer. And that's very interesting. And just to get me from stop speaking anymore garbage gibberish, I'll hopefully translate or transition over to Arrivalist, and we'll hear from Tamim after this. Thank you so much, Simon and Zeke. That was great.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Feel free to.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe it's good afternoon to everyone except Alaska, so good morning to you, sir. Thank you to the National Governors Association for inviting Arrivalists to be part of this program. I'll go to sharing my screen now. And Matt, you just let me know if you are not able to see my presentation. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm Timothy Axtell. I'm the Vice President of Insights at Arrivalist. We're a company that's been around for about 8 years. It still feels a little bit like a startup. But in those 8 years, we've had the opportunity to work with 150 destinations across 45 states and 40 US state clients directly. We were created to fill the gaps in information that were needed for the tourism industry, and our business has really evolved in response to those evolving needs. Like COVID, we've launched products during the COVID pandemic period in direct response. We also work with Brand USA, USTA, international destinations, many airports, and even the Green Bay Packers. And typically we're working with economic development departments and tourism offices there at the county, city, and state levels. I know there were some questions on privacy, so I can get right into that and tell you a little bit about how we approach that from Arrivalist side. We are a location-based company, data company, so part of our panel that we rely on is based on smartphone activity and apps. We provide visitation intelligence to our clients, and we balance our data on a monthly basis. We implement something called a trip model. That means with the data that I show you today, it's not raw data. It's defined by an overarching trip. We're going to look at data from Iowa today. So we're defining a minimum distance traveled, a minimum time in the state, a certain continuity of GPS pings, and a certain logic. We want to make sure that what we report back to you makes sense and is reliable. Another important note is that we do not sell any media. We are a research and analytics company. We're like the Switzerland. So we're not in the media sales business. We're GDPR.
Timothy, just a minute. Your slides are all broken up right now. I'm not sure if are you displaying them or is Matt displaying them?
I am displaying them and I can switch to an alternative view.
Okay.
So we'll just go into this this slide share mode here.
That works. Thanks.
If you don't mind, and just keep things simple. We just won't build up as much suspense. That's okay. All right. So a note here, someone had asked about rural areas. So the fact of the matter is, if someone is in a very rural area, that state park may be underrepresented. And part of that is by design. We have this rigorous trip model criteria where we need to know that someone is in that location. If they do a digital detox for weeks at a time and they go completely off the grid, it will be as if they did not start that trip in the first place. And that is because we do need that continuity. We actually report trips back to our clients when they have returned back home. So we're not counting commuters, we're not counting relocators, we're counting truly visitors. to those states and to those points of interest. Another note is that GPS quality, mobile quality, is changing over time. It's getting better and better. If we were to look at just raw mobile data, it would show enormous increases in activity and visitation during the COVID pandemic period. And we know that's not the case unilaterally. That's one reason it's so important to provide balanced data. So back to some of these questions, answering almost journalistic questions, but the great thing about location-based data is that you can answer them in a non-subjective way because it's based on real activity. So for any trip, we know where they're coming from, where they're going. I'll use this term POI. It's a polygon that we've drawn, in this case, state parks. When they're arriving in terms of seasonality, which is really important because you want people to visit the state not only during peak times, but during those shoulder seasons. What day they're arriving on, how long they're staying, and how that equates to economic impact, and then why they might be visiting. Do they see media exposures? Do they attend an event? Do they arrive during a holiday? Today we'll take a glimpse mostly at Iowa, a bit from Oklahoma as well. We selected these specific state clients because they do have state passport programs. In Iowa's case, they have a state park passport. So we'll take a look at those. So for Iowa, we set up their state park polygons in a way that would mirror the way their passport program was rolled out. And this program is, of course, to encourage people to visit all of Iowa's state parks and not just the few that are the most popular. So we were able to look back to January 1st, 2019 and balance the data for those 2 years. We find that data set is the most reliable. And we're looking at an estimated just over 750,000 trips that arise from Arrivalists panel. We provide an online dashboard to our clients with dozens and dozens of reports that answer those questions that you just saw so that they can manipulate the data. They have the interface that's available on demand through a login, and they can also download the raw data for their own BI platforms as they wish. So as we went through, what struck us most is that there is a concentration at the top. So the most popular parks, and when we say popular, I mean in terms of the volume of visits, were responsible for the lion's share of visitation. In fact, the top 10 parks are responsible for nearly half of all state park visitation in Iowa across these 62. They're at the top, those are the most popular, that's measuring volume. And even the top 5 are responsible for almost a third. And what we see is that in the face of the pandemic, that concentration is growing. In some other states, they're becoming more spread out. This means that the state passport program is happening at an important time. Some of the implications for states, sustainability. We want dispersion throughout all of those state parks, not just a few. When we think about traffic and stress on infrastructure, wouldn't it be better to get fewer people who stayed longer, maybe made more of an economic impact in those communities that really need it, rather than those frequent visitors in and out? So sustainability in terms of economic sustainability, ecological, carrying capacity. We work with other states, some of which have exceeded carrying capacity because of COVID, and people are so desperate to get out of their homes and get out into nature. Also in terms of dispersion. So this creates that opportunity through the passport program to educate and promote some of these lesser known parks. The next thing we noticed here was that there's not a positive correlation, relationship between the popularity of a park in terms of overall visitation and how long they're staying in the state of Iowa. In fact, if you look here on the left, those are the top 5 states for overall visitation. And we've obscured the names somewhat so that it's a little easier to understand, knowing not everyone is going to be familiar with all of Iowa state parks. But on the left, this is a beautiful state park with a river overlook on the scenic byway, all the way to some of the famous caves in Iowa. And then on the right, kind of fast forwarded down to some of the states that are ranking towards the bottom of the list, from 22 to 25. What you see there is on the left, those really popular parks are actually not staying so long in Iowa. They tend to stay less than 2 full days in the state on their trip. And by the way, when we define this trip, we're looking not only at out-of-state visitation, but also in-state visitation. But looking at these other parks that are less popular, they're actually staying longer in the state. What we see here in green, the height of the bar is how long they're staying in Iowa in hours. That dashed line is the share of trips each of those parks is responsible for. So that's diminishing as we move towards the right. The green is how much of their time they're spending in Iowa, not in a specific state park. That little blue sliver is how much they're staying in the state park. You see Lake Park 22, they spent nearly 30 hours inside the park itself. Not so much time in the rest of Iowa. Whereas Lake Park number 55, they're spending a long time in the state. And in just a couple of minutes, we'll look at that interaction between different state parks in terms of a heat map. So again, concentration at the top that these passport programs are trying to work against to get people to explore more, and not necessarily a positive relationship between popularity and length of stay. We want those visitors who are going to stay longer. Now let's look at the origin markets. Here I've combined the top 5 state origins for all of Iowa's state parks for the post-COVID period, May through the end of November 2020 versus that same period in 2019. And while as a state, the state park visitation has dropped slightly, we see these interesting shifts in share. Share meaning if we take all the trips and total them up to 100% for each of those periods, what proportion are associated with each of these states of origin? And what we see there in 2020 is that there are more visitors who are coming from the state of Iowa. And this is what we really see across the board for our state clients in their parks, is with risk perceptions, people aren't wanting to travel far. They're substituting away from flights, they're substituting away from long haul trips, and they're tending to explore a little bit more of their own backyard, those places where you always think, oh, I'll go to that park someday, I live here. Now they're really doing this. So we do see that Nebraska's share has dropped off as well as Illinois. Wisconsin's has remained flat, so they've remained somewhat loyal and mobile in their visits to the state parks there, especially along the border. Missouri was in the top 5 last year and actually dropped off to number 6 position this year. So we're seeing these shifts, interesting shifts at a state level that states should be aware of. Now let's zoom into the DMA level. And in general, kind of going back to one of those privacy questions, generally we're reporting at the DMA level, the metropolitan area. In some cases we report based on zip codes, but never on individuals, never at the household level. So here we are looking at what we'll call an urban family escape. This is a state park that's located on the border, the western border of Iowa and Nebraska there in the Omaha area. And it's funny, when we first ran the data, we realized we were leaving a lot of visits on the table. So we ran an alternative model where we lower the requirement of miles to travel. And we saw that actually 91% were coming from that same DMA of Omaha, a very local visitor. However, when we look at it through another lens of length of stay, in terms of the quote unquote quality of the visitor, the potential for economic impact, Lincoln, Nebraska, and Des Moines were there at the top. Okay, this is actually really peculiar, this map on the right, because at Arrivalist, we typically see a positive correlation between distance traveled and the length of stay in the state. That is not the case. Why? Well, if you look at this map, you'll see it's people actually driving across I-76, driving across I-80. A large portion of these visitors to Iowa state parks are passing through. And at Arrivalist, we can distinguish between somebody who's a primary visitor, they spent the most minutes of their trip in Iowa or any other state or any other city or county, versus those who are just passing through. And both have an economic value, especially in these days. It's all about intercepting them, whether that's through digital wayfinding or physical signage, whether it's educating people in the employees that work in your visitor center to encourage them to explore, even if they're passing through, explore a little off the periphery. You know, if it's a family, encourage them to go to that local park. Encourage them to visit this historic downtown. It's just a little further and it's well worth that trip. Okay, so let's just delineate this. We've seen state level, DMA level. Let's go even simpler. Are they local or are they non-local? And in this case, we're defining locals as those within a 50-mile radius of each state park. The non-locals are 50 miles or further from that state park where they actually reside. Okay, so 3 examples. One is a lake park, aquatic recreation. It's close to a couple of major DMAs in Iowa. 3 out of 4 of those visitors are locals because they're near those population centers. Very different here from this river overlook that's a scenic byway. By nature, people are driving, and it's a gorgeous place for fall leaves. So they are driving more than 50 miles, 80% of them, to get to this state park. So it has a certain gravity to it. And then we have a famous cave state park, and it's actually closed now for bat migration, which is really cool. But it's serving more of a balanced populace, people who are local and visiting. Okay, why is this important? Let me give you a very local example. I'm based in Florida. Our beaches and the lack of paid parking is a very hotly contested topic. And it's charged with testimonials. It's very emotional. We were able to go in and run the data and show who that primary visitor was to dispel myths about whether it was a tourist or whether it was locals. And once we had settled on the fact of the matter, we were able to think about how to move forward and actually influence policy. And you, as state decision makers, can think about this at an even greater scale. And also just for the employees there at the parks to understand what level of education and familiarity there are between all of these state parks. So now let's take a look at behavior. 2 very different examples here. On the left, we have that local activity. So within 50 miles of the aquatic recreation center that's near some major DMAs. What you see in blue though there, the blue is the aquatic recreation center. The orange is the river overlook with the scenic byway. We're looking at local activity on the left, non-local activity on the right, okay? So under 50 miles there on the left, we see that this lake actually peaked in June 7th of 2020 for that local activity. People wanting to get out in the water, it's hot, and they're ready to get out of the house. Very much different. On the right here, that orange peak you're seeing, that's in the height of leafing season, on October 10th of 2020. And these are people who are traveling at least 50 miles just to come see the leaves. So it sounds a little bit like a Walt Whitman poem, water and leaves, seasonality and gravity. But these points of interest, these state parks have their own seasonality. We're so used to looking at this at the state level, but it's not monolithic. It's happening there at the individual state park level. These parks couldn't be more different. They're serving different people and different behaviors. And I think that it's important that employees and the states understand this so they can think about how they might want to influence that behavior to mitigate risks and spread that visitation across the year. Okay, unfortunately, in addition to the COVID pandemic, there are few of us who have not been impacted by weather-related crises. So a crisis within a crisis, okay? Whether it's hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes. Well, Iowa had the derecho. When the derecho hits out of left field, does it make a big impact on state park visitation overall? Well, in fact, August 10th was a Monday. Mondays that's when the derecho hit. That's typically the lowest visitation day of the week in terms of state park visitation. So although it's a terrible thing, it hit on a day that did not greatly impact the overall visitation levels. This is showing all those 62 state parks, which rebounded quite quickly. When we're working with states that have had a lot of flyers in the past, you know, a hurricane hitting Florida, the whole state might suffer, even if it's just hitting a certain part. In this case, there's so many Iowa residents who are traveling, kind of protected you and mitigated that the response because the risk perceptions were lower. They knew that that was hitting Cedar Rapids. So let's look at the 2 parks that were closest to Cedar Rapids. They on the other hand, those parks are largely driven by local visitation, if you recall in the former slides, and those recovered much slower. Why? Well, people were probably at home repairing damage to their homes rather than out recreating. So I'm happy to report that it looks like they reached normal visitation levels by Labor Day and beyond at these 2 specific state parks. But when we look through the lens of crisis mitigation, understanding crises, we can look at a macro level and also zoom there to the micro level. This matrix that you see here is like a heat map. What we're looking at is people who make trips to Iowa, whether they go to just one park or whether that overlaps with another park visitation within the context of the same trip. Where you see darker green, there is more overlap, and where you see lighter green or white, there is no overlap. And what we noticed here was really surprising to the team at Iowa is that one particular park, that popular river overlook that's a scenic byway, was overlapping with the greatest density with 2 other state parks. So really interesting. And it seems that because people are traveling, we know that they're traveling from further away to go there. They're in their cars, they're looking to experience that they're hitting up multiple state parks. Isn't this great to know? So that a ranger or someone in a visitor center can encourage someone to make an itinerary of the trip. The more they see in a state, the more likely they are to come back. The more they're exploring the periphery, the more economic impact in those communities that need it. So there are a range of implications from training to dynamic web content that's serving up itinerary ideas based on the type of visitor. Even things like working with bloggers and influencers who can tell a greater story, not just of one experience, but of a whole kind of string of pearls of these beautiful state parks in a state. And of course, we can also look practically at which states are associated with people who are flying in through a major airport or visiting visitor centers. So now we'll shift from Iowa to Oklahoma briefly. I wanted to show you Oklahoma. We have really great POI coverage across the state as well, but it's different. And they had a rush of Texas visitors coming to their state parks, to the point that some actually reached and exceeded carrying capacity. What's really interesting here, they're using the same model, but they're most interested in Route 66. So I want to show you that the model that we apply for state parks can also be applied to scenic byways, to museums, historic preservation areas, ecologically sensitive areas. Any kind of point of interest that we can draw on a map, we can wrap that with insights and perspectives. So for Route 66, they're able to see the overlap with casinos, with airports, with tourist information centers. So they can find the opportunities to move people around more, and what the densest heat points in the heat map are, where they can put out information about dispersing people around the state. You can even see little things like the 2 WinStar and Choctaw Casino. There's a lot of cross visitation over those. So we do work with state parks. We can measure private businesses as well. And there are many implications here, again, with signage and wayfinding, training, even things like working on co-ops. Is a zoo, should a zoo be working with an airport, or should a zoo be working with an attraction to help promote that cross visitation? Same with state parks. So whether that happens through your employees or through websites or emails, those are all possibilities. So I'll wrap this up, but I think we've answered some of these questions on where visitors are coming from, where they're going, how long they're staying, when they're arriving, and all of that through the lens of the COVID pandemic, and what some of those implications are for state lawmakers and state decision makers. I've left you just with a couple of links if you'd like to learn more about Oklahoma State Passport, Iowa's State Park Passport Program. And if you have any specific questions, I can answer them now, or you can reach out to me over email.
Thanks, Timony. Hey, Matt, I'll take it over because we do need to wrap it up now, but thank you so much, Timony, Simon, and Zeke. I just have one difficult question that maybe you could ask, really quick, answer really quickly. Our offices are pretty much new. They're pretty much on a shoestring and budgets are tight this year. So what is the general cost of the service to get this kind of information? That's great. Is this the kind of information they want to take, but they also have information from like Bureau of Economic Analysis. They have participation information from OIA, and that's all free. But what's kind of the general cost of this, like the range of cost?
A wide range, from turning on every product and feature to really powerful daily updates. So, I can work with you directly on pricing. We also have state co-ops that offer even more subsidized prices within the context of a state co-op. So we have a very wide range. And because of the pandemic, it was really important to us to come out with lower cost, more accessible tools, knowing that unless they got CARES Act funding, budgets have gone down. We actually have a free tool on our website at arrivalist.com. So you might want to start there. Called the Daily Travel Index, and then we can go from there, and I can try to help. But wide range and some low cost options available.
And when you say state co-ops, what do you mean by that? Some states are getting together and getting
right. Some states actually they basically subsidize programs that we roll out to specific entities like counties and cities and organizations within the state. That's one option where the state, the state's trying to make as much information available to its constituents as possible. Right, so they help out a little bit with the cost.
Right, okay. And how about Simon? Did you want to jump in there too?
Yeah, certainly. So we also do have a tool that is free of charge for anyone to try out. It's ubermedia.com/VPR. And similarly, we have a variety of products. Like I mentioned, we can deliver data as simply as an Excel file with raw data sets on them. That would take a little bit of work on your end to sift through and get some insights out of, but still has a lot of really great information in there. Something like that can be as accessible as $5,000, maybe even less, depending on the geography. And then something that's a little more custom that answers questions more directly, like the dashboard that Zeke walked us through. It can range up to $30,000. So it depends. We have, depending on the geography, depending on the questions you're looking to answer, we're happy to work with you. We're very flexible.
All right, great. Well, thank you. I want to thank you all so much and thank all of our members for being here and our other speakers. So we're going to close out the meeting. And I also want to remind everybody to please take the meeting survey. So you all are registered or else you wouldn't be on here. So the survey will come to you automatically after this meeting from NGA Events, and it takes less than 5 minutes to take the survey, and it just really helps us improve our meetings and look at other topics you want to delve into more from this meeting. And we have a whole list of follow-up items that I know I read out the list last night, but I think we're losing people here, so I think everybody's a little bit tired on a Friday at 4 o'clock. So we will also be sending out a takeaways from this meeting, a little takeaways summary from each session, and then also be sending the resources that were mentioned by the speakers and in the chat box for each session, and we'll organize it by session so you can refer back to that as well. So just want to thank everybody. I think this was a great meeting, and thank all of our speakers, moderators, and our sponsors, of course, and also our members for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bevan.
Thanks, Bevan.
Take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.